the new SEC.
Thanks for tuning in. This is a new SEC podcast. We had another hot week of football with week 7. Hunter, what'd you think?
Big weekend, man. I mean, SEC kind of had me on the edge of my seat. After Alabama played, my heart rate took probably the rest of the evening to get down. But huge shakeup all around. Big 12, some shakeup too. It was a good weekend.
Yeah, it was a solid weekend. Good balanced weekend. Alabama kicked you off right there at noon, so at least you got the heartache. You could take the Tums after that game, and you probably felt good by 7 p.m. So
yeah, Texas put in some work against Oklahoma, which was, I think some people expected it. Some people maybe had some denial on what Oklahoma was going to come out and show. So that was a fun one to watch at the beginning when they were playing back and forth. But then we had the big overtime thrillers with at night with both Tennessee and Florida, and then LSU Ole Miss. So good weekend. I don't know why anyone says NFL is better than college, because this is so much better, high energy.
Greatest product in the world right here. And look, I got to get my phrase in. Texas versus Oklahoma, belt to ass, man, belt to ass. I'm sure Texas was excited to avenge that loss last year. Continue to look like one of the most dominant teams in the country. But are they the number one team for real? We'll talk about it later in this episode. We got a little bit around the country, and we got some really big headlines and some reactions and takeaways from the SEC when we talk about the action that we saw on Saturday. A lot to take away from these games, and I think Ole Miss, LSU had a lot to take away from that one as well. But we were thinking about around the country. Anything stood out to you?
A couple things. I think the Big Ten had the biggest game with Oregon and Ohio State. It didn't really matter who won from an around the country standpoint. They'll probably play again later this year. But we had some AP poll shakeup. Oklahoma now out of the picture with that unfortunate loss. But, Ole Miss dropped. We still have 8 SEC teams, ranked this week. So from around the country, you're trying to figure out who is strong. And I think Texas is now still that strongest team from the SEC. LSU making their way up, and that is the story, is LSU showing some improvement.
Yeah, LSU is definitely showing some improvement on defense. The offense is looking pretty steady. It's amazing what happens when you limit turnovers. And so that to me was the game of the night. Obviously, I watched the Oregon and Ohio State game. Really tragic what we saw happen for Will Howard. A lot of these moments probably didn't present themselves in the Big 12, and the moment looked a little too big for him. Just to be honest with you there.
Yeah. Kansas, yeah. It could have gone a ton of ways. I think they might have been able to get that timeout out in time if he would have just slid a split second earlier to kick the field goal.
Yeah. And let me put some respect on Will Howard's name. He's a Big 12 champion. Took down TCU the year TCU made the championship, but tough scene for him there. And I still think Oregon won the game, but it in some ways Ohio State, like you said, if they just could have got slid down a second earlier. Completely different discussion here.
Yeah. I would have liked to see USC beat Penn State. I was watching it. I was rooting for it.
Yeah.
I wanted to see it because I don't think Penn State is necessarily a number 3 team in the country week over week.
We just got to see James Franklin and Ryan Day do what they do best. Lose in top 5 ranked matchups.
Right. I really thought Penn State was going to lose that game.
Actually, Penn State won. I apologize. Penn State won. I was just unshameful. Ryan Day.
If they were ranked, if they were ranked, James Franklin would have found a way to lose. Yeah. That's what he does.
Yeah.
So K-State showing some Big 12 prowess, beating Colorado. Whoever won that game was going to get some love. So good for K-State, moving on up, trying to find the Big 12 picture.
Yeah, I don't know who has longer hair, Avery Johnson or you, Hunter.
I'm growing it out just to be like him. No, that's good. Yeah, I maybe they'll hire me. I could play for the number 17 team. I could go out there and throw some passes.
You could.
In the Big 12, I mean, it's wide open, and then not a whole lot of competition out there.
Not a ton. BYU still looking good. Still undefeated. Took care of business against Arizona. Arizona is kind of in that same bucket as Oklahoma State. Just the preseason hype, they have not lived up to it. I think they're both sitting around 500 now. Oklahoma State and Arizona. Iowa State's still undefeated. Took care of business against West Virginia. West Virginia was another one of those teams in the Big 12 that had a lot of hype going into the season, and someone has to lose. I feel like that's kind of the story of the Big 12, and this was one of the first weeks we didn't see as much cannibalization in their matchups with some of the top teams that were ranked high won. Utah, I think, was on a bye, if I'm not mistaken. Or Utah played.
Utah lost. Yeah,
Utah lost.
they're out.
They're out, and now they're without Cam Rising. So it's Zach Wilson's brother, Isaac Wilson's time to take on the reins over there at for the Utah team.
Yeah, we'll see if Cam Rising does his medical red shirt, tries to get another year out of it, or if he decides to figure out something else to do.
Right.
But I hate to see that for him.
Yeah, it's definitely tough on the injury side, but he's definitely played a lot of football. Might have played more football than I did, honestly. Middle school, high school, to college. These man's played a ton of football.
Just in college, man.
Right.
Yeah, crazy.
Anything from the ACC?
Not really. I mean,
Yeah.
Pittsburgh could have lost. Like the missed field goal there from Cal. I know that was heartbreaking for them to see. I think the ACC is still kind of right now ran by the big two in Clemson and Miami. The AP poll, Miami at 6, Clemson at 10. They're kind of running the show there for now. I don't think that Pitt really has that oomph to get them to be one of those top 2.
Florida State's good too, right?
Oh yeah, right. They should have been in the playoff last year.
Right. No kidding. Typical for the ACC. It seems like it's always been like a 2-team conference. Like whether it's Clemson, it's like Clemson and who else? Every year, or the random Louisville years. But just from this week, we look at the AP. You got Miami. They didn't play. Clemson's sitting at 10. That's really all they're really showing. They got SMU at 21. So. We'll see. SMU doesn't play Miami this year, from what I remember, and I don't think they play Clemson either. So they'll probably kind of stay pretty clean. Then you got Pitt, like you said, Pitt beat Cal, so Cal's kind of become the ACC's good punching bag.
Right. Unfortunately, 0-3 now in the ACC.
Yeah.
We got the service academies ranked, Army's ranked, Navy's ranked.
Mm-hmm.
Good for them. Vanderbilt probably should be in there somewhere. They got 68. They were the team on the outside right now looking in, so they'll be ranked next week as long as they take care of business against Ball State.
I don't know what else they have to do. Like you beat the number 1 team in the country 2 weeks ago. Is it the Georgia State loss? I mean, we're looking at this thing, and Notre Dame is sitting there at 12, and they lost to NIU.
Yeah. I mean, Missouri, Vandy, that's such a close game that went down to that field goal at the end. So Vanderbilt will be ranked. Yeah, and that might boost Alabama's resume a little bit, than having them ranked instead of one of the worst losses. So
that's college football in 2024, right? You got your good loss is Vanderbilt.
Yeah, the poll will change next week for sure with Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. There's some games that will really shift where this is at. Definitely. So don't get too settled on it, I guess.
Yeah, high level for you, Hunter. If you had to kind of power rank the conferences, where we at?
I think right now, even though the AP poll says maybe differently, SEC 1, Big Ten 2.
Okay.
Kind of driven by the top dogs. I think Big Ten is more top heavy than the SEC. SEC has a little bit more depth. And then I would probably say, from a skill standpoint on who's got it, I would go ACC, then Big 12 at the end.
Really? Okay. I guess, yeah, because their top teams look more stout.
Yeah. Big 12's wide open still. I mean, it's finding its way, but I still would take, I think, Miami and Clemson over any Big 12 team.
I mean, yeah, especially I would say Clemson's to me has looked a little bit more impressive. Miami's higher. They obviously have Cam, and he's best quarterback in the country, right? But I mean, we watched what Clemson did against Georgia, so I think the Big 12 is kind of in the spot where you don't really know what BYU and Iowa State can do against the top team, which is is it better to be in the unknown? I don't know. I mean, and maybe that's why Iowa State's ranked ahead of Clemson, in addition to the 1 loss. So maybe it's the Big 12 in me where I'm like, maybe they're third, but I get why the ACC would be third on your list.
Yeah. Now, I'd say once you drop down into the conferences, there is more depth in the Big 12. So the conference as a whole, probably, if it went down to bowl season, I think the Big 12 would win against a lot of ACC teams. But a lot of football left to be played this year. It'll move.
It'll move around, and it always gets interesting when the college football playoff polls come out. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like they really show you what matters. Like, is it strength of schedule? Is it, game control? Is it what conferences they value? You can really see it. Like, it usually is very significant, significantly different than what we see sometimes from the AP. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
The new AP polls out, and that kind of ranks all the teams based on the playing up to this point. But we wanted to look at the SEC from the defensive side of the ball and kind of power rank them based on performance to date. And the SEC is one of those conferences that was always looked at as defensive powerhouses. Defensive side of the ball is what's been the most dominant. I think it's changing a little bit in today's football, where there's some more high scoring happening in the SEC. But we put together 1 through 16 SEC power rankings of the defensive side only, and we didn't agree on everything. So flipping those up on the screen, we got different number ones. We got different all throughout. Tennessee at number one. What's your big drivers here for what you're looking at and how you rank these teams?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, this was a really fun exercise to do. I love the power rankings, collectively for the teams. I love the sides of the ball power rankings because it doesn't have to always correlate to how good that team is records wise. Like, that's the purpose of power rankings, but I think it gets even more fun and thought provoking and conversational when it comes to picking offense or defense and ranking those teams. So, what are the main drivers for me when it comes to power rankings and specifically Tennessee? Number one is making key stops when it matters and keeping your team in the games. And all season, that is what Tennessee has been able to do against, I think, a little bit stiffer competition than Ole Miss, who I have at number 2 in mind. You look at this game against Florida last week, able to make some key stops on in the red zone to allow their team to still be in a spot to win the game. Right, this team has not given up more than 19 points in the last couple games on the defensive side of the ball, which makes it a lot. So basically, you're just asking the offense to score 3 touchdowns to win the game. Makes things a lot easier. Those are some of the main drivers for me when I think about why Tennessee's defense was number one: competition, game control, key stops, and point total.
Yeah, I think Tennessee's team defensive, unit has been keeping them in games like single-handedly are the reason that they're where they're at.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they lost their leading tackler last week, Keenan Peely, captain of the team, linebacker. That's going to be tough. They did well against Florida, keeping them out of the end zone. I think losing him is one of the tie-breaking factors in 1 and 2. I got Ole Miss at 1. Their run defense just been incredible. Least amount of rush yards in the country allowed, only 66 per game. They're good at getting to the quarterback. We talk about him every week. Chris Paul Jr., he played another great game last week against LSU, both on the pass rush and in coverage. Ole Miss did have some coverage busts this past weekend, but I think overall they've played solid behind an offensive unit that sometimes has lapses. So I like Ole Miss at 1. I think that the 1 and 2 is pretty interchangeable.
Yeah,
so.
And I think that's reflected with, like you said, 1 and 2 being interchangeable. I had Tennessee 1, you had Ole Miss 1. Flip flop it, that's what we got. Talk to me about 3, 4, 5.
Yeah,
for you.
Texas has just been dominant. Again, we're going to talk about it later. We've been talking about it for a while. Like, Texas hasn't had the strongest resume from a level of competition played, but no one's really been able to do anything on them offensively at all. Like, Mississippi State did a little bit, and that came off of some turnovers. I think Texas looks really dominant. The only reason that they're not higher for me is that they just haven't played the level of competition that would justify it. South Carolina, I think they have one of the best pass rush units in college football, so I got to have them there. Kentucky, we differed on Kentucky. I have them at 5. You have them at 3. I think they've done well. And I don't think that me having them at 5 is that they're less than these other ones. I just think that Texas and South Carolina have looked stronger defensively than Kentucky has.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think one thing about my rankings is this is so far, right? We talked about Texas' schedule. I really kind of give the nod to strong defenses against strong opponents, and so you look at what Kentucky was able to do against Ole Miss. Kentucky was able to kind of hold Vanderbilt to really like their season, one of their season lowest totals offensively, right? The team, they held them to less points than someone's team that they're a fan of on this podcast, right? So I think that that to me kind of holds Kentucky in that higher light at 3. Texas at 4. Again, it's just that their statistics when it comes to their rush defense, when it comes to just their pass defense is top 5. They're top 5 in both categories from that standpoint, yards per game. And then South Carolina, I have them at 5. We're going to talk about that defensive line. I mean, Kyle Kennard is one of the most nastiest defensive linemen in the country. He's got 7.5 sacks this season. And this South Carolina defense, if you listen to our past episodes, I feel like I said Kentucky's defense is the SEC championship defense. South Carolina defense is really nasty too. They don't have that offense. So
yeah, definitely. There's a couple teams in here that the defense, like we said, I mentioned it on Tennessee, where the defense is kind of carrying them. I think Oklahoma at 6. We both have some similarities here at 6, 7, 8 with Oklahoma, A&M, and Auburn. Oklahoma and Auburn both having defenses that have kept them in games where they haven't done well offensively.
Yeah.
So they look good. They're keeping them in games, but they're not as dominant. Oklahoma's right there. Oklahoma is right there. They didn't keep it up against Texas, and I don't know if anyone could expect them to with how often Texas was taking shots at them. But A&M's developed a lot, and then we kind of differ a little bit at the end. We both have Arkansas at 9 and 10, but I have Missouri at 9. You have them at 13. So there's some differences there.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, well, the difference is, Drink's not the defensive coordinator, so
okay,
that's it. No, I think for me, when I look at Missouri at number 13, I can't black out that 41-10 game. Their pass defense statistically is middle in the SEC, but like when you actually watch them play, you watched guys like Thomas Castellanos at Boston College kind of rip through them. You watched Diego Pavia rip through this defense against this defense in their close win. And I think once they kind of got into power for play, we've seen some challenges on the defensive side that the offense just couldn't necessarily kind of make up for. And so that's why I have them at 13, compared to Bama, who I think is more capable, has more talent on defense. And I know you have a lot to share when it comes to their defense as well. So.
Yeah, and for Missouri quickly, that's a good point that when it got into real ball and they're not playing Buffalo or Murray State, it changed a little bit. And 9's not a good ranking. Where they're ahead of Arkansas, Alabama, for me, is that the Missouri defense, they haven't had a lapse that has caused them to lose a game or to be in a spot to lose a game. And I think Arkansas has, when we saw the Oklahoma State game, like they couldn't keep up. Alabama in the Georgia game, they couldn't keep up. So Missouri, they had interesting looks from Boston College, had interesting looks from Vanderbilt, and they kept it together in those games. Gave up some points, but they didn't put their team against the ropes from just a full-on breakdown of what they know how to do defensively. Alabama, I think, is more talented. Yeah.
That's a really good point, right? I just want to co-sign that point. So Alabama, of course, there is more talent there. I had Florida at 10. Florida's defense is again, maybe I'm thinking a little bit too highly of Tennessee's offense, but Florida's defense has shown some improvement the past couple games, slowing down that UCF offense, even less than what we saw from them playing Colorado a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Florida has come a long way defensively, especially in stopping the run game. We saw it in that UCF game. They've come a long way. I think Georgia, I have them dropped a little bit lower. And I think the game this past weekend just has to be a statement for that Mississippi State, who, if we did this offensively, I think Mississippi State might be at 16 in that too. And you let them get back in the game as a Georgia team, 31-41 on that game. And there was kind of some questionable calls, the holding call there at the end. It's part of the game, but they were driving to put more points on the board. So I don't think that Georgia's defense is anything that's fearsome for a team to play against. So I have them dropped a little bit lower. I think LSU on this one, for me, I could say that LSU could be higher, maybe should be a little higher.
Yeah.
I'll stand on it for now just because of the defensive performance to date. They played well last weekend, but to date, not well. So until I see that consistently, they're going to sit low.
Right. And isn't it funny because, Georgia, Bama, LSU right now are the 3 highest ranked SEC schools, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Other than
Texas.
Texas.
Other
Yeah.
than Texas, right? So it's those four, and we both have Bama, LSU, Georgia in our bottom 11 to 16.
Yeah.
And then Texas, of course, is number one nation. I have a number 4. You have a number 3.
Pac-12 lives on. High scoring, bad defenses. Like
Yeah.
it works. Like these teams
Yeah.
have good offenses. Like when they're firing, Alabama for sure. LSU, yeah, Nuss is a great quarterback when he's playing well. Carson Beck's a great quarterback when he's playing well. So
Yeah.
they're able to kind of keep up with that pace of where their defense maybe is faltering.
Yep. Yep. And we did, and another thing that really stands out to me when I look at this is just Arkansas and also more importantly, like Auburn, like anything you've seen from those two defenses that have like impressed you, or just kind of business as usual, given their team's performances.
Yeah, Arkansas, I think, is one of those roller coastery up down defensive teams where they are either on fire and we're like give Travis Williams a head coaching job in Power 4 school, or they're giving up big plays back to nonstop. So
Yep.
there's just a lack of consistency when it comes to Arkansas's defense. For Auburn, they're a good defense. They've kept their team in games that they shouldn't have been in. Even if they lost the game, it should have been a lot worse. The 5-6 turnover games, like, and they're only losing by 10 points because the defense is getting that ball back.
Yep.
They're trying to get the ball back, or hey, we'll get a punt here. They're showing things that can keep this Auburn team afloat. But if the offense isn't performing, that's kind of where we see Auburn at this point in the season. So
Yeah.
I think Auburn's defense is playing the best. They're the best unit on the team for sure.
Absolutely.
They just haven't been consistent enough.
Absolutely. And I think for viewers that are watching this, I'm kind of going back up the rankings, but you look at Oklahoma, they got beat 34-3. Some people might be thinking, like, how is Oklahoma's defense this high on the rankings? For me, that explanation is when your defense on the field that long against a team like Texas, they're bound to score. That game was close-ish in the first half. And you look at some of the games against Tennessee, against Houston, against Tulane, and against Auburn as well. Like, this defense has kept them in a lot of games where the offense has not shown as much there. So to me, that's why they're ranked higher. But I don't know if you have any thoughts there.
If Oklahoma's offense wasn't as depleted as it was, I think that early momentum that Oklahoma's defense was building would have made that game a little different. They had that interception early. They were stopping Texas, like right out of the gate. They were stopping them. But over time, you're just going to break down, and there was no momentum. There was nothing to build on. Like, the offense would get a little bit going on a couple first downs, and then they turn, get the ball back right back to them. So
yeah, I got one more question for you. So what do you got?
No, I was going to say, I'd say that 1 through 8, 1 through 7, I would say good defense. 8 through 14, I'd say questionable but okay, serviceable defense. I'd say 15 and 16 is where you're kind of in a problem, exclamation point, do something.
Exactly. And I mean, we saw a good defensive performance from Vanderbilt this past weekend. We understand that Kentucky is a efficient offense, not an excellent offense. So I think that Vanderbilt was able to kind of capitalize on that type of offense they're going against. The rest of the season has not looked super impressive offensively or defensively for them. And Mississippi State, I mean, the story is the story. It's better, but still not amazing. Who do you think between 9 and 16 have the best chance to jump into that top, we'll say 7?
I'm gonna say Alabama. I think it's not a talent question. It's not a question of the players. It's not a capability of the team. I think it's just down to the predictability of the play calling defensively that is causing them to be where they're at. Because we saw at the end of the South Carolina game, they started bringing that blitz, and things changed. They were able to get pressure. We saw this was probably their best defensive game this past weekend, and I want to say and see the possibility of this being a stepping stone improvement week over week. So I think that they have the most potential to do it, and the teams that they're playing for the rest of the season are going to give them opportunities to do that too.
Yeah. And I think I agree with that, right? I think that Alabama's defense, we've talked about it from a scheme perspective. We've seen a ton of impressive plays. And the one thing you've always honed in on is that, like, they really leave the DBs on their own to kind of, guard one-on-one. And from a matchup perspective, I think that I don't know, like we've talked about it, like there's not a ton of super impressive passing quarterbacks coming in to be playing the next couple of weeks. I mean, even from a receiver perspective, you obviously have Missouri, but I'm not that impressed when it comes to the receivers are playing against and what we are expecting from this team from a defensive back perspective. So I can see Alabama being most poised to get into that top 7. For me, although their schedule doesn't necessarily warrant it, I feel like I can't have amnesia to how impressive Georgia's defense had looked prior to playing Alabama and the second half of that Alabama game, right? I'm not giving them a moral victory, but they were able to lock down that offense to, I think under 14 in the second half. So for Georgia, I mean, they had the number 1 passing defense going into that game. Obviously they gave up 3 touchdowns to Michael Van Buren against Mississippi State, but I still think that there's an opportunity for this team defensively to improve. This is where Kirby is always kind of honed in on, a former defensive back himself as a head coach over there. Looks like he wanted to play a little defense this last game, shoving Michael Van Buren. He's trying to push his coach, but I think Georgia is, to me, most poised to get in that top 7. Like I could see them, displacing potentially A&M at some point. And so that's my team right there, I would say.
Gotcha. I mean, it's always going to change. We're going to be rolling with this. We should do another one down the road once we get through a couple more weeks and see what's changed. But it's fun to go through. We'll have to do offense next.
Yeah, we'll definitely do offense next. And if you're listening here, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear who you guys think is the best defense in the SEC. How we did rankings wise. Do you think that Auburn should be higher? Do you think that Arkansas should be higher? They got TJ Metcalf. He's got three picks in the year for them. I got to get my Arkansas shout out right there, right? Every time. If there's someone you think we should have higher or lower, let us know. And it was definitely fun putting this one together. So this week we saw the number 2 team go down, Ohio State to Oregon, and then Oregon became the new number 2 team. Texas reigned as number 1.
Yeah.
And the question is, who should be number 1? Should it be Texas or should it be Oregon?
Look, Texas 34-3 dominant win over Oklahoma, kicked them out of the AP poll. Oregon 32-31 win over Ohio State. Good game there. Texas was a bit of a snooze fest with the pull away.
Yeah.
It's tough. Who should be number 1? Like I think that Texas, at where they were at number 1, they didn't do anything to be booted from that spot, right? Like if you take out, you can take out the UL Monroe game because that's an inferior opponent. They're still number 1 in the country in scoring margin at 34.5 points. So this team is just dominant. So I don't see why they wouldn't be number 1. I think you maybe disagree a little bit on that one.
Yeah, I think, look, this is a new SC podcast. It's not the new Big 12 podcast. But to me, Oregon, I think, I think we were talking about this earlier, right? Texas beat Michigan. Texas jumped to number 1. Bama beat Georgia. I think, Georgia was ranked higher. Bama jumped to number 1. Bama loses, right? Texas never actually lost. So to me, it's like Oregon beats Ohio State, the second highest ranked win in the season behind Vanderbilt, undefeated resume. Why don't they make that jump to number 1? If we have the respect that we have for Ohio State, to me that jump makes sense. And if I look at their second best win, it's Boise State. To me, those 2 wins between Ohio State and Boise State are stronger than Michigan and Oklahoma.
Yeah. And to your credit, like someone brought this up in the comments of another video that we did, and for 4 of their last 6 games, they've played either a backup quarterback or a quarterback who was later benched. 2 of the games they played teams that just had no intention of passing the ball in Michigan and Oklahoma. UL Monroe's quarterback now benched. They got Van Buren's first career start at Mississippi State when they played them after Blake Shapen was out for the year with an injury. So they've got teams kind of at their worst, but they've looked pretty unstoppable in those games. No one's really been able to get close. And you mentioned the win over Boise State. This is their ranked team. They're going to probably be in the playoffs. 3-point game. And you tried to ignore it, but Idaho, FCS team, they went down pretty bad this past weekend. The Vandals there. And that was only a 10-point game. I mean, I know a win is a win. A win is a win. But I think that Oregon has showed weakness, the ability to be beaten.
Right. I agree with that. I think that Texas, from an eye test perspective, has looked much better. You like you said, you play to win the game. The Idaho game is a blemish. Those games, for better or worse, like these FCS opponents are kind of a lose-lose. Like you win by a lot, which you're supposed to do. If you only win by 21, it's 28-7. It's like, And Oregon didn't look as efficient, right? Dylan Grable. It's week one. Dylan Gabriel, I think he just became like the third highest passer, third highest ranked passer when it comes to yards of all time in college football. Right? He knows how to play ball. He's played for three schools now, and I think he's had a good transfer route. Good start at UCF. Obviously, good at Oklahoma. I think it was just kind of them warming up, right? So, collective resume. Yes. Yes. Collective resume. That's a blemish.
Yep.
Going forward, ramp up, it's been business as usual for them. And I think their competition in some ways has looked a little bit better. You can only play who you're scheduled, but at a certain point, the schedule in your opponents has to matter. Also, funny enough, UL Monroe, quarterback General Booty, he got benched. So some could say he's ass.
That's good. That's good. Man, you can throw me off track here. No, but so looking at kind of the justification behind rankings, right? Like, so we saw Missouri when they played Vanderbilt, who right now is on the cusp of being ranked. They only won by 3 and they dropped from a win. So does a point differential in a win matter for AP poll ranks? And should it matter? Your opinion?
I think it only matters if the game control looks off, right? Like, I think if we're talking like Ole Miss and LSU, Ole Miss, I think they dropped they were 13 or 12, right? So no, they were higher. So they dropped a good amount, but I feel like that drop was more so warranted based upon just how the game looked. I think it's just subjective. I will say overall, I think it's subjective whether or not the point differential should matter, given the opponent. So that's a ride in the fence answer. But what do you think?
I think it should. I think it should matter when it comes to, like you're saying, more of the intangibles of the game. Not like box score. Looking at the score doesn't matter, but looking at, did you look dominant? Because I think you can look dominant in a 15-point win, 14-point win. It doesn't have to be, I said it earlier, Texas, 34.5 points per game if you take out UL Monroe, which I'll do just to make it even closer.
Yeah.
But Oregon 17th in the country at only 16.2 points per game, which is still a lot. You're winning games. The resume for Oregon, I think, looks better, but Texas can only play the person in front of them. So they have their chance this week to get their Ohio State level win when they play Georgia.
Yep.
I think that Oregon looks beatable. So does Penn State.
Yeah.
I think that Texas right now, I wouldn't be able to pull out what I would say is the way to beat this team, except for their occasional ball security problems.
Yep.
Which every team has at some point.
Which every team has. Yeah. I mean, and every team has their challenges. So I can make the case for Texas to be number one. I think that, I keep, for me, number one is that Resi.
Yeah.
And, I'm just looking at, and look, like, what's great is like you said, they have the schedule to continue to justify number one, at least going to Georgia or playing Georgia, right? After that, it gets a little fluffy, but they have the opportunity to get that marquee win. So it's not, is it that Randall, or that I think that they are not one of the best teams in the country, number one? No, I just think that if we're going to go off of everything we've seen to date, I think Oregon deserves to have that number one spot for a week. I think if Oregon was number one right now, and they're playing Purdue this week, and Texas is playing Georgia, and they were number two, and they beat Georgia, they would
go back.
They would just spin it right back. They put Texas right back to number one, and I think that'd be justified. I'm just saying, like, I think that Oregon should be number one just based off the resume. Outside of the Texas-Oklahoma game, the biggest game in the SEC, I would say, was LSU versus Ole Miss. This game took place in Death Valley at night. Ole Miss came in, and it didn't disappoint. 29-26, overtime game. Some things to take away from LSU's performance, some things to take away from Ole Miss's performance. What would you say you took away from this game?
Man, OT thriller, Kyron Lacey showing out when he needed to at the end there.
Mhm.
I'd say I take out that LSU, all the question marks we had around their defense are maybe starting to go away a little bit. The defense was phenomenal. 6 sacks on the game. They kept them in when Nussmeier wasn't maybe playing that great at the beginning. So
Yep.
LSU's defense stepped up, got the ball back after each turnover. And on the other side of the ball, Ole Miss looked great at times. They had some offensive inefficiencies, the drop early, the missed field goal, turnover on downs, a little bit sloppy there on a penalty side. But the game was still good on both sides. Both teams still brought some heat to the game.
Yeah. It was definitely one of those games where I felt like both teams impressed me. Like I didn't find myself unimpressed by Ole Miss's performance. Obviously, very close to winning this game. LSU, like you said, their main gap was what they could do on defense, and it looked impressive. Garrett Nussmeier ended up finishing the game with 335 yards in the air, and so he continues to look pretty impressive. LSU finds themselves in a position where they got a really key ranked win now.
Yeah. It's going to mean something for the playoffs. Like that, I think, is the biggest takeaway, not performance. It's how does this impact the playoff? Because the SEC has so many teams sitting right up there at the top.
Yep.
And for Ole Miss, when we were prepping this season, we're like, this is the best schedule that Ole Miss could have, the best team Ole Miss could have to get to the playoffs. And now they're still looking at their biggest game. Georgia was the one they were prepping for. And now they're going into that with 2 losses when really they wanted to go in lossless and that be the one if they had to lose.
Right. 2 losses in 3 games at that, right? The
good.
Kentucky loss was definitely not the one they wanted, but for Ole Miss, when you look at, do they still control their destiny, or are they on the outside looking in as we continue this season here when it comes to the college football playoff race?
Yeah, 2 losses. I think most teams that get into the playoffs outside of the guaranteed bids, like there's going to be some 2 losses in there. If you beat Georgia, let's say that Georgia beats Texas, they're going to look solid on the AP poll when you play them down the road.
Mm-hmm.
If you beat that Georgia team and you win out, you beat Oklahoma, you beat Arkansas, you beat Florida, you beat a Mississippi State team who doesn't look that bad against how they played against Georgia.
Yep.
I think Ole Miss now all of a sudden you're in a driver's seat, but you're not going into that guaranteed a spot.
Right.
LSU is much more in a driver's seat and controls their destiny.
Yeah, I think if you're Ole Miss, you got to hope that the Big 12 only gets 1 team in. You got to hope that the ACC gets no more than 2 teams in. Maybe Notre Dame finds a way to lose to, I think they play Florida State or, just someone on their schedule. But I agree with you. I think if it played out where Georgia beat Texas and then they beat Georgia and they ran the table with an Arkansas team that's beat Tennessee, with the Florida team that's looked a little bit more impressive of late, I think they're in between the 9 and 12 spot in the playoffs. Yeah. It's a big if on beating Georgia because it's something that they haven't done in quite some time. But you want to believe it's possible, right? I think this LSU game to me showed that they can kind of compete at that level. This is the LSU team they did beat last year that had Jaden Daniels at quarterback. So it's not that it's not possible. It's just we got to see it.
Yeah, it's a crazy game. Crazy game last year when they played. This one was still crazy, just not as high scoring as that one last year that seemed to have gone on forever. Ole Miss, they can beat Georgia. I don't think that Georgia's as strong as they have been in the past. LSU, I think, can do anything that they want to do at this point in the year, make the SEC championship. They have no loss in the SEC right now. They will play Alabama next, probably their biggest test next on their schedule. They have Arkansas, they have A&M, Vanderbilt, Florida, Oklahoma, but they have a chance to pick up 2 more ranked wins if they beat Alabama and A&M. I don't want to say win because I don't want it to happen.
When is predicting the future?
Yeah.
Don't want it to happen, but
they have a good resume with that.
They got a really good resume with that, like you said, and this Arkansas team could end up being being a 500 team. That's a strong win if they win that game. A&M would be a really strong win if they win that game. I can't imagine the loser of that game drops too far in the rankings, and so LSU is definitively in the driver's seat. Now the question is, are they capable of driving? And I would say yes, right? We went through our power rankings last week, and I had LSU, I think in my top 5 and for the SEC, or maybe top 4, if I'm not mistaken. And if that defense can play the way they played, with the way Nuss is warming up, this is a dangerous team. I don't fully see that much of a difference between them and Alabama, minus like honestly, I just don't really see it. To be honest,
Okay.
when it comes to like the offenses are similar and the defenses to date have looked similar. So
Yeah.
if Bama's defense improves, it might be similar to what we saw from what we saw from LSU against Ole Miss. So
I think LSU's still struggling to run the ball a little bit. That would
that's
be
a
their
good point.
downside. Nussmeier took some time to get started in this game. Once he did, he's a good quarterback.
Yeah,
The run game, I think, will be their biggest holdback there. And then I can't say in one game that the defense is there. The
right.
DB's play is there yet. That play at the beginning of the game that Trey Harris dropped could have been a huge momentum changing play right off the bat, an 80-yard touchdown or something. So,
Yeah.
Ole Miss, I'm questioning if they hit their ceiling under Lane Kiffin. Like because this is the best roster he's put together, the best schedule they're going to have. I'm starting to think that maybe they hit their ceiling. I thought they were going to go undefeated. I was like,
Right.
oh, they could beat.
You did.
This is good.
Yeah.
And now there's like 2 losses that I just didn't expect to happen. This one
What
more so than the Kentucky one.
when you say they hit their ceiling, right? And we can kind of end here soon, but like why do you say that? Like is it the Kentucky game? Is it the LSU offensive performance? Like, Ulis Johnson for their team played pretty, or Ulis Bentley, not Johnson's the president. Ulis Bentley played pretty well in the rushing game. So like, why do you say they hit their ceiling?
Because right now they have the best roster and the best schedule. They're not able to do it. So what needs to happen? You have a good coaching staff. You have a great coach.
Yeah.
Is he just not like they're not going to look better next year? So this was their shot. They're gonna have opportunities, but this was kind of their shot, and it's not happening for them.
Right.
It's not over. You're not done, but it's not looking good. You're not controlling your destiny as much anymore.
Right.
So I'm starting to think that maybe it's tougher for them to have an opportunity to reach this with him at the helm, which is where those rumors are coming in of where he may end up down in Gator country.
Absolutely. And I think he could end up down in Gator country. Look, if you're an Ole Miss fan who listens to this, let us know where you think Lane Kiffin potentially ends up as a part of this. But I can say that I agree a little bit. It is a little bit discouraging to see some of these close losses to Kentucky and to LSU. Maybe people came into the season with expectations that like they were going to dominate some of these games. And maybe their ceiling is, playing them close. Could be, I would say there's swing games. Like they played them close enough where they've had opportunities to win. They just didn't come out on the right side. So maybe that is their ceiling, right? And I guess we'll find out, right? I think the ceiling can be raised if they play up to Georgia. If Georgia continues to play as good as we believe they are, right? So I think that's kind of where when I look at Ole Miss, if they're at their ceiling or not. But overall, both teams have a good chance to make the playoffs. LSU's obviously better. Ole Miss is very fortunate that some of these other conferences are not representing as much when it comes to the rankings as of right now when it comes to the AP.
The Georgia Bulldogs against the Mississippi State Bulldogs this past weekend. What was supposed to be maybe a blowout game over a 30-point spread, Georgia played a little bit closer than that, 41-31. Mississippi State looked like they had the juice to come back. When we're looking at Georgia, who's now number 5 in the country on the AP poll, they came into the season at number 1 when they played Clemson. When we're seeing games like Alabama where they're losing, Kentucky where it's close, Mississippi State, who without any doubt is probably 16th in the SEC as far as anyone's concerned, putting up numbers on them and giving them a game at home. The question is this Georgia team as good as advertised to us when the season started?
Yeah. So it's a fair question, right? I think if you stop the count on this game in the first half, Georgia was dominating Mississippi State. They were holding that defense to a pretty strong, stop when it comes to this game. And I think Georgia kind of did what they do, right? They get to 34 points and they kind of slow down a little bit on offense. They look a little bit, slower running the ball. And to answer the question, is UGA as good as advertised? The advertisement got as high as number 2 in the nation, and right now it's as low as 5. Right? So, are they the best number 5 Georgia team of all time? No. But I think they look like who we thought they are based upon what we've seen. B plus passing game, B running game. The defense is what concerns me a little bit coming off of this game because this team used to be, the number one passing defense in the country. And we didn't see that this game, right? And we've seen some opportunities kind of, with the Alabama game and with this game where this defensive unit has been able to be picked apart. And so for what Georgia wants to achieve when it comes to the playoffs, being good as advertised to me is they're good. It's not the same quality as we've seen in the past.
No. I mean, coming into the season at number one, I think that this team is closer to LSU than they are to Texas, as far as a output product on the field. Not that that's a knock on any team because LSU is still showing signs of life and being good. There's tremendous talent, coaching, both sides of the ball. I think that they are probably one of the more roller coastery type teams where you don't know what you're going to get on any given drive from them. You'll get Carson Beck playing great, and then you'll get him throwing a very light and easy pick to the other team. We saw the one against Mississippi State. That was just a poor decision. And, we were questioning going in if the weapons were going to be an issue for this team. Right now, they have the most dropped passes in the SEC, far and away from most other teams. Arkansas and Auburn are close there, right behind them. 13 drop balls on the year. Arian Smith, who's your number one target, kind of leading that pack, dropping 20% of his targets.
Yeah.
So they're not doing any favors. Beck has been having some turnovers, taking time to get going. Secondary was concerning against Alabama, concerning in this game. They're going to be tested against Texas. So I think that where Georgia's sitting at 5 is probably a little bit more proper for this team than the number one designation that they got coming in. Number 2 when they were playing Alabama. I think that we're starting to maybe see them shift back. I think that Texas beats them, so I think we'll see them drop even more. But the talent is there, the coaching is there. They just have to put it together.
Put it together. I just don't think we've seen that leap that we thought from Carson Beck this season. We haven't seen that leap that we thought to see from Trevor Etienne, and that's where the advertisement was 2, or 1, and it's not living up to what we thought they were going to be. It's less, and it's even less than what I think that these players are capable of delivering. And that's where, for the first time in a while, Georgia's looked vulnerable, right? Like this was another game on SEC Network that you just didn't think was going to be a close game for them. And I don't think we're alone speaking this way. I'm sure Dog Nation and all these other Georgia publications feel the same way, where these are the games you want to win convincingly. If you're the one of the better teams in the country, like this to me was a win that felt like a Big Ten team beating another Big Ten team, where it's like, oh, like we're Oregon and we're playing someone like Purdue and it's a close game and it's okay, but like in the SEC, this is where we typically see these large gaps with opponents like Mississippi State, which we talked about, 16 in both of our power rankings, one officially, one hypothetically. And so they're not, to me, the answer is no. They're not as good as advertised. There is room for improvement. Are they capable of taking down 1 through 4? Jury's out, right? We'll see them play 1 this week. But we had talked about it. You're like, even Penn State could give them a game potentially. So
yeah. And I want to preface this: a win is a win. You win the game. You play the game. You play the game to win the game. Mississippi State is a Power 4, 5, whatever you want to call it, ball club that has SEC talent. So a win is a win, and you're happy with it. You're not playing to a spread. But do they look convincing as what they? I still think that they are one of the top 3, big 3 in the SEC right now with Texas, Alabama, and Georgia. They have the talent. They have the leadership to be anything that they want to be. Am I counting them out against Texas? Absolutely not. Do I think they're the best team in the SEC? Absolutely not. I would say that the general feeling around Georgia, from what I'm seeing everywhere and how I'm looking at the games, that they are a top tier caliber team that just has lapses from time to time. I think that the dips in performance are just that dips, as opposed to the heightened performance is them showing out. I think that they are that top team that just dips at times.
Yep. I agree with you there. And so they're good. They're leaving room for more. And so we'll see what they have coming up this week against Texas.
Yeah.
We had another game this past week. Alabama took on South Carolina. It was at noon. It was definitely an interesting one. Kind of kept people's eyeballs on it for the majority of the game. Bama found themselves on upset watch for the second week in a row. And, the question that we kind of left this game is, it's a win, but is Alabama's problem deeper than their defense?
So in this game, I would say, and for the season so far, I would say that the problem is maybe just barely deeper than defense, but defense is the number one problem. I think the biggest problem for Alabama right now is defensive play calling and scheming. And I can get back to that because where I think everyone's mind goes is that there's culture problems, there's coaching problems. And there might be slight culture problems, players getting buy-ins, is there fight in the defense? I don't think any of this is exclusive to Alabama. It's the new college football where it's harder to get players to buy in.
Mhm.
And I think it's easier to pinpoint that for Alabama because they do have a new coach in transition from one of the best coaches of all time.
Yep.
So it's easy to point at other things, his hoodie or him being happy after a game that they won at home. You're happy you win a football game. Like there's things to improve on, but you're not going to sit here and yell at players. And people that say that Nick Saban was that way is not true either. Because we could roll a clip if we wanted to of Nick Saban saying, "When did we stop being happy with winning a football game?" I know I'm ranting here, but there's going to be growing pains when you fire when the best coach retires of all time. Not really an opinion there, really just what it is. And you bring in a guy and he's had 6 games. There's going to be growing pains.
Yep.
Look, a coach doesn't care about your parlay or your point spread. It's you win the football game. And I think that defense is the biggest problem. And they're getting there. I think that this was their best defensive game that they've played this season so far from an improvement standpoint. They started bringing blitzes in unique ways and look what happened. They got turnovers. That it wasn't just send 4, drop 7, keep some linebackers in the middle. It was, let's get some guys involved. They had some linebacker blitzes. We saw some of the safeties get down in the blitzes at the end of the game, and it worked. So the path is paved to go the right way. I think that people are making a bigger problem out of something that maybe isn't the issue.
Yeah. And look, Alabama is, that 5-star restaurant you always go to. There's new management now. It's the same cuts of meat. It's the same, same lobster mac. It's for some reason, it's not hitting the same way that we've expected it to hit. Right. And less food aside, I'm a big guy. I like to eat. It's more so just, I think people have become accustomed to Bama winning in a certain way. Right. And I think there's 2 themes here. There's a new coach, new regime, new era of college football where you have to focus on retention and adding new players, right? Like keeping a lot of those guys, right? You lost Caleb Downs last year. We were really happy on Saab being there this year, right? So that's overall looking like a okay trade.
Yeah.
On the other side, taking the portal and some of the macroeconomic dynamics of college football, it's more so just the bar that Saban has set for this defense, what this team has done, what they do against teams historically like South Carolina. I think I asked it last time, right? Like this is the second opportunity for Kalen DeBoer to pass the test of like we are who we think we are, and we're going to dominate a team like this. Like, how do you play against teams that fans expect you to dominate? We didn't see domination, so the question becomes like, is it the defense? Is it the offense? Is it the culture? And I agree with you. The defense looked significantly better this game, but then it was like, well, where's the offense?
Yeah,
and so that's an area where I'd love to hear you kind of shed more light on, honestly.
Yeah, and I think offense is like you're due to have a turnover. Quarterbacks have turnovers. They're not going into the year with it. And I'm like the biggest Jalen Milroe defender. That was a bad game. He played a bad game. And the offense didn't fire on all cylinders. And right now, this Alabama team doesn't have the defensive prowess to afford that. And that's what happened here. If the offense was playing where they should have, if you had a turnover in the end zone, if they were playing where they should have, then the defense would have been fine with 25 points. That last touchdown might not have even happened to Nick Harbor there because they wouldn't have been throwing the prayer. So, the defensive side of the coaching aside, coaching will get figured out. Fans better settle in on it because Kalen DeBoer will be the coach at Alabama, and that's not changing. but the whole staff is new. So there's these growing pains. And I told you this, I texted you this earlier, that I think dynasty football is kind of a dying art
Yeah.
where it's harder to keep that. It comes from having a full clip of players that are going to be, freshmen that develop, sophomores that develop.
Yeah.
And you now have to like keep those guys. You have to keep recruiting them, or you have to play them right away, or they're going to leave. There's more
Right.
parity in college football. So yeah, we were talking about that, and it's just, I think there needs to be a little bit of grace given. I know that it's a team with high expectations, but they are performing. They're the number 7 team in the country. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough, right? So it's like, and just kind of bringing it back, like, is this defense, is the problem deeper than defense? Like, I think both of our answers are kind of, the defense looked better. I still need to see more. They're still under my watch to continue to see them to improve their performance. They did a good job against South Carolina. The bigger picture is we're seeing some of the depth challenges that have come from this portal era, like you said, right? If you're a freshman coming in, you wouldn't transfer your sophomore year to sit out till your junior year. Now you can transfer and play somewhere else. So if you stayed there your sophomore year and you saw the light to start your junior year, you're not going anywhere. So now you have 2 years under the same coaching staff, under the same coaching. That's a lot different than bringing in new receivers, new defensive backs. Luckily they were able to retain their top lineman coming back from Iowa, right? But you don't get a brand new center, so those aren't the problem per se fully. But you are seeing some of that new team chemistry develop on top of just a newer era where players are a little bit more empowered and have a little bit different type of a voice when it comes to the culture inside of the organization. And we're really seeing that here. And like you said, with the parity and the gap between teams, it looks closer. Like, it looks closer with South Carolina versus them. It obviously was closer against them with Vanderbilt. And in some ways, we're seeing it with Georgia too, though. I mean, Georgia's playing close games with Mississippi State. They're playing close games with Kentucky. So it's kind of across the board.
Yeah, it is. And all that to say, it is something that's getting sorted out from what I can just see from the side, But all that to say, even though the problem may not be deeper than the defense is a problem. Like, I'm not gonna skirt past that. It might look better, but they are a problem. You said it early in the episode, they're leaving freshmen out on islands out there, and things will happen when you do that. You're just hoping it doesn't happen enough to beat you in the game, but they're not sending pressure according to what they need to do. And when they do, it works. So I really hope that this isn't a defense who's holding stuff back, like from a play calling standpoint, because you got to win some games. Like, don't wait until, because at the end of the game, they're trying to put some pressure on Sellers. And when they did, they get turnovers. And it's like, so you had that, you've been practicing that. Why didn't you do that? You didn't have a single sack against Vanderbilt. Like, and this week you get 4. Like, why are you not? Where was this?
Right.
So,
like, it took a Vanderbilt like performance to see these types of plays called. It feels like, right? Like, I'm not in that room when they're watching film and they're scheming on what plays to call, but it was like, to your point, it's like, where was this last week? Where has this been this season? We're glad to see it. Or for some people, they're glad to see it, right? Not everybody, but we're glad to see it if you're an Alabama fan. But it's like, where was it?
Yeah, and it's like you at the end of the game, they get down there, they score. Okay, they missed the 2-point conversion, they get the onside kick, and it's like, oh man, like, we need to do something, and they're bringing all this pressure, and it's like, why did you wait till now? Like, it's working. Why did you wait till now to do that? Because when they mix in the unique looks, they got some safeties involved in blitzes. The linebackers blitzed a lot more this week. It worked. So when you're playing later this year, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, I mean, I'm just thinking, right? Like, that's the type of defense. If I was a recruit or a player in the portal, I want to play for. Like, I want to play for a defense that gives me more opportunities to find myself in position for sacks. Like, defense that's creating pressure where there's more opportunities to create interceptions because the quarterback's under duress. Like, that to me, it's an obvious statement, but like, that's how you continue to get the best players in the country with that cursive A on your helmet, right? Like, or not on your helmet, but the number on your helmet, the cursive A on the field, right?
Yeah.
So that's just my thoughts there.
Yeah. I mean, this last thing on this, and looking forward for Alabama, where the defense needs to go from here. You're going to play quarterbacks that you need to pressure. Nico is not as good as I think we thought. So I'm not going to count him out of the situation. But when you're looking at Brady Cook and Nussmeier, both of which have weapons, you don't want to leave Luther Burden on an island with your freshman DB. You
Don't
don't
do
want to.
that.
You got Theo Weiss on the other side. You're playing against Nussmeier, and you saw what happened. He just threw up a ball to Kyron Lacey, and that's how the game ended.
Yeah.
And that was 1v1, the safety coming over. You don't want that to happen here. So you need to get pressure on them because that's when they're going to be mistake prone. You can't just trust that you can out muscle 5 linemen with your sending 4 on your D line. It's just not going to happen as much as you might think.
And it's not, again, I think it's like the last point, and maybe I don't think we're dragging it, but it's like, again, you're going off of what we've seen with Saban, right? I think he made like 8 of the last 10 conference championships, like something ridiculous like that. They've always had amazing offenses, but defense was like the pillar of Alabama football, right? Like obviously you had Mac Jones, you had Tua, but those AJ McCarron teams, I mean, it was more about the defense than the offense. Like it was more like the defense is so strong, it propels the offense to dominate and you suffocate teams. We're not seeing that. It's what we're used to seeing. And we saw a little bit of it last year, but it's just a trend that we're seeing. And I think you had talked about it. This kind of started a little bit last season with some of these other factors in college football. But to me, that's to me, when I think about Alabama football, I think about like just like that game, even though it was LSU versus Alabama, it's like that defense had like 7 or 8 pros on it, right? And so that to me has always kind of been their bread and butter. The offense has just been mostly running ball and a strong passing game, but built on the defense to me.
Yeah. They'll get there. They'll get there. Let the coaching develop, let the players develop. You hate to see it, but Tennessee next week is going to be a huge test for what this team can do defensively and offensively because they're going up against a tough defense. So we'll see what Alabama has in the tank.
South Carolina versus Alabama, we got to see what some could say is really the best pass rush in the country. Hunter, film guru, film god, some would say, was able to kind of watch some of this game and really just dive into some of the defensive stats. I mean, I think right now they have the SEC sack leader. And so talk to me a little more about this SC pass rush and where they rank in the nation.
Yeah, and I do think that they are one of the best pass rush units in the country, and I'll preface all of that with kind of saying who I think is right there with them. I think it's Michigan, Ohio State, Ole Miss, and Texas that are right there in that bundle of who is the best pass rushers, and I think that helps us fledge out who is maybe number one. Looking at South Carolina, what they've been able to do against good O-line play has been incredible. And it is Kyle Kennard, it's Dylan Stewart. They're 2 of the most electric guys in college football from a pass rush standpoint. And they're doing it every play. So that's where I think is different when you're looking at some of these guys that maybe are above them on your radar of pass rushers. The fact that Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart are running at the quarterback damn near every play, it's not disguised. Like they're going right at him and you just can't stop them. Against this, they played against LSU's O-line well. They played against Alabama's O-line and gave Milroe, Heisman contender, the worst game of his career, pretty much. I don't want to say guaranteed he's not going to New York, but I mean, took him out of that conversation for the most part. And, safety, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss for Kyle Kennard. They looked electric. I think some of the other teams are doing well, but it's not just those 2 guys, TJ Sanders, Tonka Hemingway. I mean, the front line of this game is why South Carolina was where they were.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and when you look at this front line being able to control the tempo of this game, right, gave Alabama kind of some fits from a rushing defense perspective or from a rushing offense perspective. Kyle Kennard is everywhere. He almost has like an offensive like impact in games, right? He's forced 2 forced fumbles on the year. Opportunities, for South Carolina to find their offense in better positions to score. And so for this defense, to me, they are the neutralizer to keep them in some of these games.
They are. Yeah. And if Sellers didn't fumble away this game at times, like they could have ran away with it with how much pressure that they were putting on Milroe. And just there was multiple times that they were running free. I think part of that was on their ability, but Alabama was trying to almost scheme away from those guys. Like, let's push the line away from him and get there before he can get back there because we know we can't stop him. And it's an Alabama O-line that's awesome. Now, to flip it, Ole Miss has done well. We've talked about them numerous times at what they've been able to do to getting to a quarterback. They weren't really able to do it this past weekend against LSU. And that's why LSU won that game, I think, is that they kept Nussmeier clean. Michigan, I'd say, is probably the only one that I would put as a contender for number one with South Carolina. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, two guys that are going to the league. They're unstoppable. Josiah Stewart. They've played decent competition. They've played Texas. They will play Ohio State this year, so we'll see how they look there. I think that South Carolina can definitely, fight for that spot at who has the number one pass rush. It's between those two to me.
Right. And South Carolina has some really strong tests on their resume, like to show that strength of that defense, right? I mean, that Kentucky defensive performance is just aging like good wine. Like it is just dominant. We saw them just absolutely, putting Brock Vandagriff in situations where he wasn't comfortable. And that reflected in some of the passing stats there, that just from that pass rush. Michigan, that's what they do, right? They produce guys like Rashad Gray over there. And you talked about Kenneth Grant, who's playing right now for Michigan. For Ole Miss, it's obviously they built a lot in the portal on the defensive line, on the defense in general. And so respect that, for a lot of teams that should be lucky Kyle Kennard as a senior. So he might not be back next year, but they got to deal with Dylan Stewart for a couple more years here. For a while. And for the Gamecock fans, hopefully he stays in that garnet and black. But definitely to me, you can make the case. I'll give it to them because they're in the SEC, but I'm sure people might feel otherwise if they're the best defensive line unit in the country.
Yeah. When it comes to pass rush alone, there's been some run stopping things for both these teams, but just looking at getting to a quarterback and making him have a bad day, they are able to do it. I mean, they're going to go against Oklahoma next, which is a team that if you can disrupt the quarterback because of how poor their offense is, it'll be interesting to see what South Carolina does in that game.
It will be. And that was a game, I think, beginning of the season, I think I had Oklahoma in it, but it's with that South Carolina defense and that nasty, pass defense and pass rush specifically could be some really tough challenge for Michael Hawkins. Tennessee played Florida this past weekend. Big rivalry, I would say. This game went to overtime as well, so the SEC schedule just continued to deliver bangers on bangers, right? Left this game for Tennessee, quality win. It's always about where should we focus going forward. Every SEC team has some areas to focus on. So for Tennessee, it's where should Tennessee's focus be after this OT win versus Florida?
Yeah. And I said it once, I said it twice, I'll say it again. A win is a win. You play to win the football game. You don't care about what you maybe were supposed to do in this game. I would say Tennessee they leave this game happy that they won, but there's a lot of room for improvement. Before I get into all that improvement, I do want to give Dylan Sampson his flowers for basically carrying the offensive side of the ball for Tennessee pretty much this whole season. Without him, I don't know where this team would be. But 3 touchdowns in the game, 112 yards. He put the game on ice and finished it there in overtime. And for them, the offense is really the focus. The defense is great. They just cannot pass the ball right now.
Yeah.
The last 3 games, Nico has 5 fumbles and interception, only 1 touchdown. That's horrible. I mean, you've asked so much of your defense to be able to win games with that stat line because you're not moving the ball efficiently, 6.8 yards per attempt. Not finding his guys downfield. What we saw at the beginning of the season from an offensive side, we thought there was going to be something there, and it's lifeless, no confidence. He's eyeing guys down. He looks scared out there. I don't mean to hate on the guy too much, but
no.
I mean, damn, if they could fix that, they'd be great.
Right. And you saw it in that game, right? Like going 4 for 15 on 3rd down, like just could not advance the ball. You got to break 200 in the air for Nico, and it's just you watch that NC State game. You watched, them play against some of these other, smaller G5 teams, and you thought that this was, the ceiling. It felt like we talked about it a little bit earlier in another segment, talking about the Ole Miss and their ceiling. It feels like Tennessee has reached this ceiling because of their offense, but their ceiling feels higher because, they're 5-1 and they're still able to win because of this defense. But the main problem is this offense. And where they should go from here. It's so to me, I think you got to maybe, shrink the playbook even more for this now. We'll take the posture of young sophomore quarterback, not, potential upstart or uprising young gun in the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, the confidence is left the building. He's, early on, you said shrink the playbook, and a couple weeks ago, I think that when we left the Oklahoma game, I think my initial thought was you got to give the guy more chances to launch the thing.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some way to do that. There, I mentioned it with Graham Mertz, who, you know, RIP, injured out for the season. Hate to see that for him, but
Yeah.
they gave him opportunities to pass the ball in conservative ways, and that helped. Tennessee right now almost seems too conservative in the way that they're moving the ball offensively from a passing standpoint, that they're not getting anywhere. They had 12 3 and outs in their last 3 games, and plenty more that were just only, a few plays longer, 4 or 5 plays. So they're not moving the ball effectively. I think you just need to figure out ways to get him to throw the ball into space. And it's so much easier said than done.
Yep.
But right now the confidence is dwindling. He's seeing ghosts. He's seeing ghosts out there, and it's not hitting these guys. So for them, you need to find a way to get sustained drives going, and not just on the ground, because if they were throwing well, when they're throwing well early in the season, Dylan Sampson was completely unstoppable, because they're having to look at the deep ball. They're having to look at those passes that he was nailing across the middle when we were singing his praises on those 15-yard balls.
Mm-hmm. And I think, when we're singing his praises in some of those games against teams that maybe weren't as impressive, I think what Tennessee fans, to me, there's a little more concern this week, because although Florida is trending upwards, this defense is not super strong enough to me to be able to stop a guy like Nico like this, right? Against Arkansas, I'll give you that. Against really Oklahoma, I'll allow that type of performance. The Florida game, to me, with this offensive performance, is concerning in the air, given where Tennessee thinks they want to be going forward. And they kind of find themselves, I mean, the rankings are reflective, the third most impressive or fourth most impressive one-loss team that's sitting there in the SEC. I think that's fairly accurate.
Yeah, it is. And I this isn't to sound harsh or strict, because I'm gonna say it about Alabama too. And they're both in a similar boat where they're in this survive mode on one side of the ball. Alabama defense seems to be in this survive mode, and it seems like that's what Tennessee's offense is starting to look like, survive. And if it weren't for some gifts from Florida and some poor Billy Napier, another bad Billy Napier game where he just couldn't finish offensively, they would have lost this game. Like, Florida could have been up 17 points at half. And it just didn't work out. So they were surviving. And now these two teams will play next week. But they have Kentucky, they have Georgia, they have Vanderbilt. I'm not counting out Mississippi State, to be honest. So the offense does need to find some sort of rhythm and some pizzazz, some confidence, because that's what I think is lacking.
Yeah, absolutely. And you name some of those upcoming games. I think, from an offensive impressiveness performance or perspective, the Georgia game and the Kentucky game are the opportunities, in addition to the Alabama game, to show us that this offense can get back to the level that it was, to get to even higher heights. Like I said, I still feel like there's a bigger ceiling for this offense. Maybe you get Dante Thornton more involved in some of these deeper passes, right? You saw him have that big 42-yard pass against Arkansas in a loss, but still getting him more involved, getting him in some of those 20-yard plus passes. Maybe I'll regress or flip back from what I said earlier, but take some more shots earlier in the game. Get him more warmed up. We have seen a little bit of improvement, I would say, just from Nico's fumbling side, but just not as much when it comes from interception. Somewhere, we're seeing on the other side.
Yeah. You guys got to clean it up. I mean, and again, it's not hating on Tennessee. We've said about a lot of teams here. I don't think there's a team in the SEC that I don't see some sort of shining light for, or some sort of positive to take from it. Mississippi State, it's harder to see it, but they performed well. But we talked about Georgia, where it's like, if they can get things to click, they'll do well. Tennessee is another team that I think is right there, where if they can improve upon that, which I don't have the answer, it's some sort of quarterback improvement here. If they can do that, then they're a dangerous team. But they could definitely beat Alabama next week at home.
Yeah.
They could definitely beat Vanderbilt. They could definitely beat Georgia. I don't think that any team right now in college football looks unbeatable aside from maybe Texas, but I think even then. So if you're a Tennessee fan, you're fine. But I mean, the defense is really keeping you guys alive.
Yep. And I guess in just thinking about this segment, right? Like where should Tennessee's focus be after the OT win? We've spoken a lot on the offense. The defense doesn't really require a lot of focus. This is a class you're passing with flying colors. This defense is one of the best in the SEC. I mean, I have them at number one. In my power rankings, you had them at number two.
Yeah.
And this defense has played such a key role in keeping them in that Oklahoma game, keeping them in the Florida game, keeping them in, this even the Arkansas game that they did lose. Like the defense did a good amount. You should win a game where the other team only scores 21 points, right? And speaking in light of the Arkansas game, but offensively, it has to be the focus. And I think the tough part is you rose up Nico. It's tough to kind of be critical of the young guy. And I think this is the time to do it. He's young. You got Josh Heupel. He's a quarterback guy. He obviously played quarterback at Oklahoma. And so that's got to be the main focus. Dylan Sampson is obviously really impressive. So we talked about that, but I think the quarterback play, getting more passes that are a little bit more, intricate, further down the field and just kind of cleaning up the turnovers will take this team from number 11 to potentially in that top 2-3 SEC team discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Wrapping up, there's now 8 teams from the SEC in the top 25. SEC is still showing out as one of the top conferences following a pretty wild, week 7. Coming into week 8, we're going to be breaking down a lot of the games for next week. Another huge slate with Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, Texas. I mean, around the country, it's just probably the biggest week in college football this year. So we were excited to look at last week, but next week is going to be something special.
It's going to be a really fun week, and we're really excited to bring this episode to you guys and gals and everyone listening to this podcast. This was such a fun week of football. Thank you for tuning in. This is the new SEC podcast. I'm Randall Ledet Jr. We got Hunter Zeisman here, and until next time.